back to the Dan Cordes Show. South Africa is a movie. This is the watch party. Now, if you've been living under a rock the size of Brakpan, you may not know what's been happening with Tyla in the last week. I'm very sorry to members of the audience who I just insulted. That's totally fine. Also, sorry to Brakpan. Anyway, let's catch you up. So Tyla won Best Afrobeats Award at the VMAs last weekend. Very cool, very wonderful. She went up to get her big kind of like spaceman trophy. Lil Nas X and Halle Bailey handed it over to her. And then she gave a speech. And that was it. And we kind of thought, cool, that's it, no worries. But then some Americans online decided that there had been an incident, that Tyla had tried to humiliate Halle Bailey, an American woman, also a woman of color just like her, by making her hold her trophy. Even though, one, she passed it to Lil Nas X, the video was taken and cut out of context. Two, people do that all the time when they have to make awards show speeches. They always do this. Olivia Rodrigo, just a year ago on the red carpet, asked somebody to hold her trophy. It's heavy. Many of these people who win are small people, but they tried to turn it into a thing. And then some nobody deadbeat nothing YouTuber in America called Armon Wiggins tweeted that he really didn't like Tyla's attitude. She didn't understand American culture. And he said that she was giving entitled or uppity African, whatever that means. And this started a massive, massive flame war, an intercontinental fight between some Americans and basically the whole of South Africa, because you know how South Africans like to mobilize in the name of our people. Then Joe Budden, some non-entity C-list celebrity who once did one song in 2003 called Pump It Up, for which he only got gold for last year, decided that Tyla was being disrespectful when Usher danced up to her at a concert and tried to do the Usher thing. But Tyla didn't want to be ground on the way a lot of other people were, and Joe Budden laid into her for being disrespectful. So there's a lot to talk about. We have been in the trenches fighting for South Africa against a lot of America for the past week. And to dig into all this and understand what's been going on and why it's been such a big drama and such an important conversation, we have the excellent and wonderful culture critic and friend of the show, Faisal Kuklem 20 is here. It's banging. It's banging. Good.
This is so cool.
I know.
This is so cool.
I only come to work for them.
Yes.
Okay, something that I've been thinking about a lot is both Armon Wiggins, who's got a blue tick on Twitter, and so he makes money from engagement. So he says controversial stuff on purpose to get American dollars from, this is Elon Musk's thing. But secondly, Joe Budden is just a shock jock who makes his money from shock value, controversy stirring. They just capitalized on a non-thing to make this whole scandal.
100%, Dan. And you know what? I actually think there are kind of more socio-political factors that kind of configure in this popular culture story, right? So the first thing that I'm going to say is that American cultural hegemony is in decline, right?
Ooh.
And we know that to be true. And usually what happens when empires that have been ruling over the world for years and years and years start to realize that they are in decline is that they either create lots of instances of violence. So cue Kamala Harris telling us she's going to have the most lethal army in the world, which is a crazy thing to say, by the way. And then we start to see the popular culture paradigm start to have lots of xenophobic and misogynistic voices. And that's the case particularly with what is happening now. But here are the two pillars that I want to talk about. The first is xenophobia, okay? I want to take us back to the conversation around Tyla's coloredness, right? And African Americans refusing to understand that in our context, to be colored is not a slur, right? That there's a whole social order with norms and practices and values that dictate what it is to be colored, right? But because of American imperial ignorance and arrogance, right? They would rather not hear that for what it is, as the good faith conversation that it is. It's also interesting to me is that if African Americans took the time and understood their own relationship to their own cultural blackness in the United States, there would be so many parallels to colored identity in South Africa as a cultural identity in South Africa.
That's interesting.
Right, so these both have come from chattel slavery or different kinds of subjugation, right? And have been races that have been dislocated from their primary origin, whatever that is. And then they have to make space and a life for themselves in a new context, right? We have to think about the moment in 1950 when we started using the idea of coloredness in South Africa. Coloredness was defined as neither or, right? It was just this identity that was up in the sky. This is the same for African Americans.
Sure.
And we need to start thinking about the ways in which these conversations are in parallel with one another, right? But instead of having intellectual curiosity, because Americans are Americans, Tyla has had to face a lot of backlash for proudly saying that, by the way, she said, I am black and colored, which is not a weird thing to say. What this lays the foundation for is the conversation around her being an uppity African.
Yeah.
So instead of, I think, a really important intervention that she made to tell America, stop being racist weirdos and calling us all Afrobeat
artists.
Yeah. Perhaps maybe find out what we sing and which categories we belong to and where we come from and who we represent.
Because that's what she said in her speech.
That's what she said, which is, by the way, incredibly brave. She says this is a bittersweet moment.
Yeah, and that should have been the story.
That should have been the story.
Right.
But no, all the weirdos from America decide that this is in fact an opportunity to throw things at her because xenophobia is effectively at the bottom of this. Now, this is interesting, Dan, because to call her an uppity African is a colonial trope, right? Is the idea that these dusty Africans, what do they know?
They should learn how real culture
Yes,
is and bow down and feel so lucky that America gave them some space and a spotlight.
Interesting for me, because why then do you still call yourselves African Americans? What about that?
I heard that mic drop. That was nice. I appreciated that. No, you're right.
And so, even though it's based in colonial logic and imperialist lies, I want merch that says Uppity African because
people are doing it.
When Tyla claimed it, that was a great move. But this is the second thing that I want to talk about. I want to talk about misogyny. Joe Biden is a rage-baiting weirdo. We all know this to be true. Who, on his own podcast, incorrectly narrates what happened.
Yes.
Okay, so let me tell you what actually happened. Sid, who's Tyla's sister, and Tyla go to the concert.
The Usher concert.
The Usher concert of Mr. Usher Raymond, okay? Mr. Usher Raymond then starts to play Water in the background, probably in recognition of Tyla. Mr. Usher Raymond then realizes, oh, here's the queen, and then does what he always does, right? Which is to go and dance and so on. The reason I'm calling him Mr. Usher Raymond, because this man is Tyla's senior by a lot.
Going on a 22-year-old woman and forcing himself, because she clearly didn't want to do that.
Right, so she politely is like, uncle.
With such grace.
With such grace. It's like, I'm not going to dance with an uncle because, But I also want us to get on a time machine, zip ourselves in and go a little bit back into history when Keke Palmer did the same thing. And do you remember what happened?
They dragged her.
Misogyny came and told us that she was a loose woman. Her father, the baby...
Her baby daddy.
Her baby daddy. Told us that she was an unfit mother, apparently, because of what she had been doing.
So damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't. But this is the double bind of misogyny, Dan. And it's also important for us to realize that this is not in the distant past. So Tyla remembers this for sure because we remember it. And then it's also really important to think about what Joe Biden thinks he can...
Joe Biden. Joe Biden is asleep.
Correct. This is right. This is correct. It's really important to think about what Biden thinks he can quickly use against a woman who's already experiencing xenophobia.
Right.
To then throw in a little bit of misogyny and then hopefully have it work.
The team was trying to stop him from talking. They were like, you are factually
You
incorrect.
are lying. This is the interplay that Black women often find themselves in.
Right.
And we're going to call it misogynoir because it's the specific hatred of Black women.
Right.
And I think the problem with xenophobia, with misogyny, but particularly misogyny, is that not only is it the hatred of women, it's also the dehumanization of women. Because everyone recognizes that you should have your own bodily autonomy, right? That's not a controversial thing to say. But suddenly when women say, this is what I'd like to do with my particular body, then we raise aspersions and suspicions on that particular right. And to me, that's just like crazy.
One thing I wanted to ask you about before we wrap up is, so a lot of very smart South Africans, particularly Black women South Africans on Twitter in the last week, were making the point that like they just found it sad because they often experience great solidarity between African Americans and themselves because there's a shared history of oppression with its unique eccentricities. But the second that Tyla does something that they don't like, or as you say, BTS is getting big, the biggest stars in the world aren't automatically American anymore, then the American superiority complex comes out of the same group of people.
Exactly.
And there was a great tweet saying like, do Americans expect Africans all to arrive with like maize meal bags on their heads and to say, thank you so much for being here?
Yes.
It's just so sad to people that solidarity stops when superiority arrives.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I think it's really important to think about the difference between solidarity when you're actually invested in it and solidarity for performative interests, right? Because what we know about Americans is their imperial obsession, right? They love to be imperialists.
Best,
even
biggest, loudest.
the poorest,
Yeah.
right? Which is fascinating to me. Even those that are most vulnerable at the margins of society, when they look at the rest of the world, they're just like,
Yeah.
right? This is bizarre because if in fact the moniker African American means something, it means that we have a shared history. We are tethered to the same place. We have common struggles, right? And so it's really important for us to think deeply about the ways in which we think about solidarity that is not particularly for performance sake and for the vestiges of capitalism.
Isn't she fabulous? Weren't we lucky to hear that? Faisal Kutlem Mthonsi, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And that's our show. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back on Monday for the next episode of The Dan Quarter Show. Remember, you can watch all our episodes absolutely free on eNCA.com. Have an absolutely beautiful week, South Africa. Good night.
Woo!